Hello, my name is Fitzroy Robinson, and I will be doing a presentation today on corporate governance codes of conduct. The content of this presentation will consist of the following: an introduction and definition, role and function of corporate governance codes of conduct, codes versus regulations, compensations and conflicts of interest, current issues concerning corporate governance codes of conduct, and my references. Introduction and definition. First, it's important to note that corporate governance codes of conduct perform a very significant gatekeeper role. So what are corporate governance codes of conduct? Corporate governance codes of conduct are essentially a set of best practices recommendations with regards to the behavior and structure of the board of directors of a firm. In the wake of reported cases of malfeasance, corporate scandals, and collapsing of financial markets, there has been an urgent call for systematic safeguards and oversight in curbing, if you will, rogue behaviors of top executives, while at the same time protecting stakeholders' interests. Viewed as a reactionary response to what appeared to be willful and, in some cases, negligent responses in fulfilling executives and board members' fiduciary duties, corporate governance codes became a new reality for corporate organizations, private companies, charitable organizations, educational organizations, sports medical bodies, professional institutions, and government corporations. Corporate governance first was introduced in 1992 in the UK, brought about by a committee chaired by Sir Adrian Cadbury. The committee proposed a list of good practices. These practices were formulated under what was called the Cadbury Report. Some of the recommendations that the committee proposed were a wider use of independent non-executive directors, with independence being defined as being independent of management and free from any business or other relationships which could materially interfere with the exercise of independent judgment apart from their fees and shareholding. The US followed suit with its own model of corporate governance codes of conduct. Companies in the US must follow the company law of the states in which they are incorporated, must comply with the GAAP, and meet the demands of the SEC and Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. Common to both approaches was that the board of directors must function as a mechanism for curbing executive overreach and recklessness, while at the same time representing owners and stakeholders' interests. From the very beginning of the corporate governance codes of conduct, the thinking was that there needs to be an effective system of checks and balances, and the board of directors were to take on this role. The Cadbury Report, even though it was introduced as recommended codes, placed lots of responsibility on the shoulders of board members. The Cadbury Report called for annual re-election of the chairman or the whole board, new principles of leadership, board evaluation, new principles on the board. Codes as well as regulation wanted to ensure that board of directors were doing their jobs as overseers and not just sleeping at the switch. After the introduction of the UK codes, many other countries introduced similar discretionary codes as corporate governance codes of conduct. However, the US and China found that regulations were more suitable as agents for promoting conformance of codes of conduct. In the UK, corporate governance codes of conduct was given a comply or explain option. The US, however, offered a comply or else option. Codes have been given high marks for allowing flexibility and adaptability. Supporters like that codes are not laws but are principles based, and that any consequence for non-compliance is strictly market based. Some criticisms against regulation are that they are way too rigid and inflexible, unfair to smaller companies, and that the one-size-fits-all approach is overly burdensome. Regulatory entities in the U.S. responsible for enforcing corporate governance codes of conduct are the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. A failure to comply with requirements as set forth may result in heavy fines, sanctions, and/or imprisonment. Compensation and conflicts of interest. There are some concerns about the way board members are paid. There are some concerns that since board members are paid by the companies that they're supposed to be scrutinizing, there could be possible conflict of interest issues. The issue of board members' independence may come into question given the fact that they have close working relationships with the company executives and essentially are employees of the companies they're to be overseeing. Regulators, however, do not have these issues. They are paid by their respective regulatory agencies, so they have a bit more independence. Current issues regarding corporate governance. The question, though, is, are corporate governance codes of conduct performing the role of gatekeeper as they were intended to do? Are board members and institutional investors stepping up to the plate and questioning CEOs' proposals when they should? How do we measure the success of codes and regulations? Lots of people believe that corporate governance codes of conduct have been effective in promoting investors' confidence, transparency, and better communication between board members, top executives, and investors. Corporate governance codes of conduct is by no means a panacea, but is helpful in getting board members to do their jobs.